New Zealand didn't need to fire a shot. It didn't have to provide Ukraine with weapons or take the fight to Russia directly. None of that was needed. Instead, New Zealand just screwed Putin and his bad actors big time by hitting Russia where it hurts the most. What New Zealand has just done for Ukraine is insane, as it has broken Russia and left Putin with a threefold problem. Cyber operations, illicit payment channels, and third country supply channels have just been taken out of the game. This is huge for Ukraine. New sanctions are inbound, and they are different from anything we've seen New Zealand create before. On May 7th, the news broke that New Zealand had introduced a raft of sanctions that are specifically targeting around 20 individuals and entities that the nation says are involved in some of the most damaging actions taken to support Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. Announced by New Zealand's Foreign Minister Winston Peters, the sanctions amount to the 35th round of punitive measures that the nation has put in place to punish Putin for the Russian invasion. Only it's not just about punishment this time around. This latest raft of sanctions has been designed specifically to counter bad actors who enable cybercrimes and other aspects of the invasion that simply wouldn't be possible without the individuals and entities New Zealand is targeting. Cyber platform operators that enable Russia's hackers and cybercriminals are being targeted. So too are the providers of alternative payment services that have helped Russia to skirt around other sanctions and restrictions that traditional payment platforms have put in place. New Zealand is also taking aim at third countries which act as intermediaries for Russia by purchasing and then selling on the components and other equipment that Russia isn't able to buy directly anymore. Putin has just been royally screwed. New Zealand didn't have to fire a single bullet. We'll be digging into all three of the target categories for New Zealand's latest sanctions package, but before we do, Peters has made it clear why he targeted the 20 individuals and entities that will be horrified to find their names in New Zealand's latest list. Those who misuse online platforms to support Russia's war against Ukraine will face real consequences, including sanctions, Peters declared before adding, "We are targeting the payment infrastructure that has helped enable Russia's war against Ukraine." What we're seeing here is New Zealand doing its part to shatter the military-industrial complex that makes Putin's entire war machine possible. Bad actors from countries like Iran and North Korea are being targeted, New Zealand says, as the nation builds on the 2,000-plus sanctions that it's already implemented by taking aim at Russia's supply chains and platform providers at the source. Speaking of building on, New Zealand has been coming in hot and heavy with its sanction packages in recent months. It was only in February that the nation implemented a round of sanctions that targeted 23 individuals and 13 companies from Russia and Iran. New Zealand also used that opportunity to stick it to Putin on the oil front, as it followed the European Union by creating a new price cap of $44.10 on Russian oil. To add salt to the wounds, New Zealand also used that February round to sanction 100 vessels that are part of Putin's shadow fleet. That time around, the individuals and entities targeted were members of Russian intelligence agencies, a trio of Iranian citizens, including one involved in manufacturing drones, and the leaders of Garantex's cryptocurrency exchange that has helped Russia to keep cash flowing in for the Ukraine invasion. The latest raft of sanctions builds on New Zealand's attack against Russian crypto and financial fiddling, but they do so much more than that. At this point, you may have some questions. Chief among them is the most obvious. Why do these sanctions matter? It's a reasonable question to have. New Zealand's 20 new sanctions may seem like a drop in the ocean, especially given that Castellum AI reports that Russia is already the world's most sanctioned country. Putin, his cronies, and those helping Russia with its invasion are already dealing with 26,665 sanctions, 23,960 of which have been put in place since the invasion of Ukraine began. Why should 20 more make much of a difference? The answer comes down to what New Zealand has targeted with its 35th package, as this is where we're starting to see a big shift. It's not just the major players that are getting sanctioned anymore. New Zealand is taking aim at anybody who helps Russia in its attempts to unleash hybrid warfare against Ukraine. We'll start with the cybercrime sanctions. While all of the weapons and manpower that Russia has sent into Ukraine capture headlines, it's often what Russia's shadowy army of cybercrime groups is doing that damages Ukraine the most. Those groups, though decentralized, have a common goal: the complete destabilization and eventual destruction of the very fabric of the cyber networks that hold Ukraine together. Anything that helps to make Ukraine a cohesive nation is targeted, from logistics systems to state registries and energy networks. These cybercriminals help Putin to keep Ukrainian citizens in the dark, sometimes literally, and they have a secondary task of spreading misinformation throughout the West that is designed to limit the support that Ukraine gets from its partners. Operating from the shadows and always anonymous, these shady cybercriminals have taken advantage of hidden Internet Protocol or IP addresses and platforms that provide them with anonymous access to command servers, News Sky reports. It's these sorts of platforms that New Zealand is targeting. If the cybercriminals are going to stay hidden, New Zealand is going to do whatever it can to complicate the work they do by stripping them of their platforms. New Zealand forces Russia's army of hackers to look for newer, more expensive ways to bypass the protections that Ukraine has in place for its web-based systems. The hackers who fail can't do anything. And that's the entire point. Because what Russia's hackers have been doing for the last 4 years is extremely damaging, not just to Ukraine, but to the entire West. Those cybercriminals didn't suddenly appear out of nowhere when Putin invaded Ukraine in February 2022. They had been operational for a long time before, having started to implement and refine their tactics during Russia's initial campaign of aggression against Ukraine in 2014. Even ahead of the full-blown invasion, and specifically in January 2022, these hackers were using the types of platforms that New Zealand has sanctioned to launch cyber attacks against critical Ukrainian infrastructure, the Atlantic Council reports. Since then, Russia's cyber war against Ukraine and its allies has only escalated. Often, Russia accompanies its kinetic strikes with a cyber component, using a combination of malware, phishing, and general disinformation to gain access to systems that Russia can use to weaken Ukraine's defenses ahead of drone and missile strikes. Ukraine has its own army of cyber warriors attempting to defend against Russia's hackers while executing cyber attacks of their own. Dubbed the IT Army, Ukraine's hackers are decentralized and work tirelessly to stop Russia in its tracks. But they aren't enough, and we see that from the rate of Russian cyber attacks against Ukraine in 2026 alone. According to News Sky, international cybercrime monitoring centers have reported a 34% increase in cyber attacks against Ukrainian facilities during the first quarter of 2026 when compared to the same period in 2025. Most of the attacks came from Russia itself or from third countries that offer Putin's hackers technical support. What we see here is Russia leaning into a strategy that is working. New Zealand's latest sanctions are designed to take away the tools that the Russian cybercriminals are using, which should, in turn, reduce the number of cyber attacks that Ukraine has to deal with. But it's not just Ukraine that has to worry about the Russian hackers. Where this gets really serious is that Russia is expanding the scope of its cybercrimes to encompass much of the West. But before we go deeper into this, you are watching The Military Show. There's a lot more where this comes from, so make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're getting value from our content. If the 2014 cyber campaign against Ukraine amounts to seeds being planted, those seeds have grown into devastating plants in 2026. University College London published a piece in which it suggested that the Ukraine war may be the first full-scale cyber war that the world has ever seen. Hacking and cyber attacks are nothing new in war, the college says, but what we're seeing in Ukraine and much of the West is a far more coordinated cyber campaign than anything that has come before. For alarmists, the potential consequences of cyber war are dire. Disruptions to power grids, financial markets, or military communications could lead to chaos, economic collapse, or even loss of life on a large scale, the college's paper says, adding, "The speed, anonymity, and global reach of cyber attack contribute to the sense of alarm, as these factors make it difficult to attribute attacks and respond in a timely manner. That difficulty in response is the major problem. The West is feeling that as much as Ukraine." King's College London suggests that Russia's cyber campaign is a threat to the very fabric of democracy itself. Russia's state-sponsored hackers spread misinformation throughout the West via social media and similar channels, all while launching more direct attacks against the institutions that protect Western democracy. The information space has become a geopolitical battleground, says the Vice President of the European Commission, Kaja Kallas, and it's hard to argue with her. During the period between November 2023 and November 2024, there were 505 separate incidents of what King's College dubs foreign information manipulation and interference, or FIMI. These FIMI incidents, which happened at a rate of almost 1.4 per day, targeted 322 organizations across 90 countries, involved the creation of 68,000 pieces of disinformational content, and leveraged 38,000 channels or accounts across 25 different platforms. FIMI only covers the disinformation space, yet these numbers are more than enough to showcase the sheer scale of Russia's cybercrime and hybrid hacking enterprises. There is a shadow war raging against the West, and particularly against the European Union. Cybercrime is one part of a much larger collection of tactics that range from sabotage to airspace violations, and all of this is being done to harm Ukraine. How? Russia uses its cyber strategies to punish nations that support Ukraine, with the idea that the constant stream of punishment will add up to become so severe that those nations decide that supporting Ukraine is more trouble than it's worth. In Putin's perfect scenario, the chaos that his hackers create would be enough to cause Ukraine's allies to pull back on their support, which ends up leaving Ukraine vulnerable. Only that isn't happening. and New Zealand just proved it. So while the sanctions alone are important, especially when tackling Russia's cybercriminals, the message that those sanctions send is just as vital. New Zealand is telling Putin, without ever firing a kinetic shot in his direction, that Russia can't manipulate the nation into not supporting Ukraine. Not only that, but New Zealand is going on the attack against the very platforms that make Russia's cybercrimes possible. The scale of those crimes and the cost to conduct them will increase, which protects Ukraine directly, while also helping Ukraine's allies to ensure that the support that Putin is so desperate to stop doesn't dry up. All of this will sting Putin. His cybercriminals will be crying out for new platforms to continue their hybrid warfare. But the even larger problem for Putin is that New Zealand has also used its sanctions to take aim at the payment channels that Russia uses to skirt sanctions. News Sky reports that New Zealand has created an entire block of sanctions squarely aimed at one company that is providing Russia with alternative payment solutions. The idea behind those alternatives, the outlet reports, is to allow Russia to go outside of the traditional banking system so that it can get paid for its exports. The money that Russia has been earning via these alternative gateways inevitably gets pumped into Putin's war machine, through which it is used to purchase the components that Russia needs for its weapons from third countries. There'll be more on those countries in a few minutes, but what we see here is a direct link between the payment platforms being targeted and the pain that Putin is inflicting in Ukraine. Russia has been banging the alternative payment platform drum for years. It had to. Western sanctions stop Russia from receiving money for the sale of sanctioned goods when that money passes through the traditional banking systems. As far back as 2017, Russia had developed the System for Transfer of Financial Messages, or SPFS, ostensibly as an alternative to SWIFT. The reality is that this is a Russian-centric platform that AA reports have been used by 400 financial institutions by 2023. Russia also created the Mir platform as an alternative to Visa and MasterCard, and it's pumped a lot of resources into developing the BRICS Bridge e-payment platform. The messaging is always the same from Russia. More non-dollar and non-euro transactions are needed. And of course they are. Putin knows that these Western currencies are much easier to freeze in their tracks than the currencies that Russia wants to work with. On the currency front, Russia has also been leaning heavily into cryptocurrency since Putin launched his invasion. In Moscow sits the Federation Tower, which the Forensic Archive says is home to the world's most advanced sanctions-evading network. The contents of this single tower had given Russia a $200 billion financial lifeline up to October 2025, the archive says, and that it's been made possible because it supports a vast network of shady crypto transactions via privacy mixers. Russia is essentially laundering its dirty money using crypto that can be made untraceable as it passes through shell companies to be used to either pay Russia itself or purchase what Russia needs from third countries. These types of crypto networks made sanctions effectively useless. And that's what New Zealand is looking to counter by screwing Putin with its massive 35th package. By sanctioning a key platform, New Zealand lets everybody who might use that platform to make payments or to accept payments from Russia know that it won't abide the sanctions skirting. Putin doesn't need that. He doesn't want to see anybody going on the attack against the methods that Russia uses to pay and get paid, because he has already led Russia into an economic black hole. According to Reuters, Russia's economy contracted 0.3% in the first quarter of 2026, which marks the first contraction seen in Russia since 2023. That's just a symptom of much wider economic issues that have resulted in a cost of living crisis and Russian businesses faltering as Putin puts all of Russia's eggs in the military-industrial complex basket. Other countries have shown that New Zealand's approach works. Back in 2025, Canada and Australia created similar sanctions that enabled them to freeze assets valued at over $180 million, News Sky reports. New Zealand will hopefully be able to get a similar result. At the very least, it's cut off another avenue that Russia uses to get paid. The more of these avenues that are closed down, the worse the effects on Russia's economy become. And with no money, Putin can't provide the weapons and equipment his soldiers need on the front. Finally, there are other third country actors that New Zealand has sanctioned. We've touched on them already. They're able to use the alternative payment platforms that Russia has set up to pay and be paid by Putin and his cronies. It's possible that Russia also has third-party hackers operating against Ukraine's threats. But where these now sanctioned third country individuals and entities do the most damage is that they enable Putin to support Russia's military by providing him with access to the components that Russia needs to build its equipment. Here's how it works. Russia needs a lot of materials and components, especially when building its missiles and other advanced tools of warfare. Rare earth minerals, software, and microchips are all essential to Russia's military machine. So naturally, these are the sorts of products that other nations sanction. Unable to buy these materials directly, Russia often relies on third countries to buy them and then sell them on to Russia. The third country makes a purchase, ostensibly for itself. Then it sells to Russia, often being incentivized by Russia paying above the going rate for the product, which allows Putin to skirt sanctions. The alternative payment platforms we've already mentioned come into play here, and it wouldn't be a surprise to learn that Russia's cybercriminals are also involved in obscuring the nature of these transactions. It's not always the third countries themselves that are to blame, outside of perhaps making it too easy for people and entities to make these kinds of transactions. Not every nation that is part of Russia's complex web of a supply chain is like Iran and North Korea, which are both happy to help Russia directly. But what ends up happening is that profiteers in third nations, be they individuals or entire businesses, buy from sanctioning nations and then sell on for a profit, thus becoming some of the chief enablers of the Ukraine invasion. All of this is murky, purposefully so. There are shell companies, shadow fleet vessels, and cryptocurrency involved. But as with the other sanctions in its 35th package, New Zealand is cutting through the mire and going straight for the source. The individuals and entities that it has sanctioned are part of Russia's third country trade network. New Zealand is hitting those that it has sanctioned directly in their pocketbooks, which is the entire point. If making more money from selling to Russia is the incentive, taking away even more money than is earned using sanctions will be enough to take Russia's third country enablers out of the picture. This is all about blocking channels for Russia. With little more than the swoop of a pen and a dry statement delivered to the public, New Zealand has hurt Russia's cyber arm, its financial network, and the complex and shadowy supply chain that it has built all around the world. Putin has just been screwed, and now New Zealand is likely looking out for the next individuals and entities that it can sanction. While New Zealand didn't have to fire a shot to make Putin bleed, other nations are providing even more direct and kinetic support to Ukraine. Sweden is one of them. It's provided Ukraine with Odin's magical spear. Gungnir has arrived in Ukraine, and it's tearing Russia's forces apart. Watch our video to find out what Gungnir is and why it's so important to Ukraine. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show to see more of our coverage about the work that Ukraine's allies do to put Putin in his place. And thank you, as always, for watching.